Hello, Giants fans, and welcome to your Monday edition of the Valentine's Views podcast here on Big Blue View Radio, part of your SB Nation family of podcasts. I'm your host, Ed Valentine of Big Blue View. Please like, share, and subscribe if you're watching on YouTube, and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts across the Big Blue View Radio network. All right, your New York Giants return to work today after their bye week. They host the Green Bay Packers next Monday at MetLife Stadium. And with 5 games left in the season, late bye week for the Giants, lot to discuss about the last 5 weeks of the season, what to watch for. And here to help me do all of that is Big Blue View's Tony DelGenio. Tony, how you doing?
I'm doing well, thanks.
So you've been enjoying the bye week? You've been enjoying a little bit of downtime?
Yeah, it's a little bit more relaxing. I still wind up paying attention to NFL stuff, I think, as much as I ever do, though.
Yeah, I find that I can't get fully away from it. I mean, you still have to produce content, still have to do podcasts, and that's what people want from us, and that's what we try to provide.
Yeah.
So, as we think about the last 5 games of the season for the Giants, 4-8, we know, playoffs are a pipe dream. It's not about playoffs at this point. Um, in some respects, it's not even about winning and losing. It's about a lot of other things. It's about development. It's about figuring out who's part of this team next year and how they might go forward into 2024. But for me, the first question comes down to who plays quarterback for the Giants the next 5 weeks. Are the Giants going to stick with Tommy DeVito, find out if they think he can be a QB2 in the NFL? Are they going to go back to Tyrod Taylor if Taylor comes off injured reserve here and is ready to go after his rib injury? I think there are valid reasons for the Giants to do either of those two things. I know the fan base wants to see Tommy DeVito, Tommy Cutlets, whatever you want to call him, the New Jersey cult hero of the day for the Giants. The fan base wants to see DeVito. Tony, I'm curious what your thoughts are on the better path for the Giants over the last 5 games.
Well, I think on one of these podcasts, I think I already said that I thought that when uh, Tyrod Taylor was healthy again, that he will and should become the Giants quarterback. But I've reevaluated that over the last 2 weeks. And I think the reason for that, obviously, is that, first of all, I think there's very little chance that Taylor comes back to the Giants next season at the moment. I could be wrong about that,
It
but
certainly it certainly sounded that way when Joe Shane spoke to media the other day, that it didn't sound like the Giants were all fired up to make sure Taylor came back next year.
yeah, yeah, and then the other side of that is that what you've seen from DeVito in the last 2 games has been really intriguing. And you'd ordinarily say an undrafted free agent quarterback you wouldn't really have any serious hopes for. The best you might think is that he'd be some reliable emergency quarterback that you stash on your practice squad in case your top 2 guys get injured, or if you're really dreaming wildly, you might imagine that he could be your backup quarterback, QB2. But the fact is, the last 2 weeks he's shown a lot. I mean, he's been far from perfect. It's not like he became Tom Brady all of a sudden, okay, but he has shown, I think, some good feel for the pocket. He's shown an aggressiveness. I think he's shown fairly good accuracy on his passes, and I think he's shown that he has kind of something inside, a gumption to him, that has made him an effective quarterback in 2 victories for 2 weeks in a row. He's done some bad things also. Obviously, he's held the ball too long and been sacked. And I've been watching a few analyses on film by experts about him, and they've claimed that he's responsible for some of those own sacks, not just for not getting rid of the ball quickly, but for missing guys that were open that he could have easily gotten the ball to. So there are obviously things to work on. But I think what we're seeing the last 2 weeks is someone with potential. And if you have a young player with potential who costs you next to nothing, then I would say, well, why not see what he can give you over these last 5 weeks? And so I've come down on the side of them starting DeVito even when Taylor is ready.
I think I've kind of followed a similar trajectory with my thinking, Tony, because before we saw the last 2 weeks, I thought it was a no-brainer that you go back to Tyrod Taylor, because I thought that would be the thing that would be the most fair for the entire roster, because it's not just about the quarterback, it's about everybody else as well. But the last 2 weeks make you think twice. And like you, I think that you play DeVito because you need to find out, can he be, and I'm not going to sit here and say he's the Giants quarterback of the future and all of that, because I think the more that he plays, I think we'll begin to see, some of the ceiling. I think we'll begin to see, some of the warts. And I think the arm strength isn't great. I don't think the athleticism is great in terms of getting out of the pocket and making things happen, but there's a lot to like there. And if he can make the offense function and shows you enough that he can be QB2 and maybe QB1 for a couple of weeks next year, if Daniel Jones isn't ready to start the season, that saves the Giants money. It saves the Giants, because Tyrod Taylor, for example, is what, 2 years, $10 million, $11 million, something like that. And that's about, that's a pretty standard rate for a quality backup, number 2 quarterback in the NFL. And if you can save that money, maybe you can use that on an offensive lineman. Maybe you can use that on an edge rusher for depth. Maybe you can use that on a veteran cornerback for depth, which are all areas that the Giants need. So for me, I think DeVito has shown you enough, and he's got enough support from his teammates. Just listen to them. Watch the videos of Saquon Barkley, when DeVito was introduced the other day at MetLife Stadium, and that the team is enjoying playing for DeVito as well at this point. So I'm with you. I think you have to find out if he can be your number 2 next year, because we've seen it. Every NFL team sees it. That number 2 is absolutely critical. And it also would give the Giants the opportunity to draft and develop another quarterback as well. So, but yeah, I think I come down on the side of starting DeVito as well, which is not a place I thought I would be 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, neither did I. And of course, we have the example in the NFL of Brock Purdy, who really came from out of nowhere. And I just kind of assumed that okay, he'd start for them for a while just because they had no other options because of injuries. But even when the other guys, became healthy, they decided he was giving them a better chance. And Brock Purdy doesn't have the greatest arm either, but he manages to function very well in that offense. Of course, he has the luxury of having some of the best skill players in the NFL with him on that 49ers offense, between Deebo Samuel and George Kittle and Brandon Ayuk, that's and McCaffrey. They've got an amazing offensive team. Never mind the defense, but still, Purdy is not holding that offense back in any sense of the word. He fits right into that offense, and I think he's doing pretty much exactly what Kyle Shanahan wants him to do. And so you see that example and you say, well, you know what? You just can't be too affected by someone's draft pedigree. You have to say, let's look at what the person does on the field.
The opportunity is there, and we'll see what he makes of it. And I think my best guess is come next Monday, the national spotlight against the Packers, I think DeVito is probably behind center for the Giants. Tony, let's talk a little bit about players who have things to prove over the last 5 games, players to really pay attention to. I had you and I talked about you doing a piece on on players who kind of have a lot riding on the last 5 games, and I hope that folks at Big Blue View have read that by now as we as we're doing this show for Monday morning. But there's a couple who stand out. And for me, the biggest one, and I think everybody knows this, but the biggest one, the guy with the most to prove, the guy the Giants need to see the most, I think, is Evan Neal. They need to get him back on the field. They need to get him back in the lineup. Joe Shane said the other day he still believes that Neal can be a tackle. Maybe that opinion changes in the offseason, depending on how things go, on how free agency goes, on how the draft goes, on how the next 5 games go. But I think these next 4 or 5 games, if Neal can get healthy and get on the field, they're huge for him, and they're huge for what the Giants' offensive line looks like in 2024. Do they need to go after a guard? Do they need to go after a tackle? How do they need to approach that line?
Yeah, and so I think for Evan Neal, I think the question right now is, will he get back on the field? And I don't know whether there have been any updates on the condition of his ankle, but obviously first they have to clear him to play again, and you'd hope that with 5 games left he'd get back out there and be able to play at least a few of them, so that you could see whether there's been any further development. But he's been I think the most amazing potential miss of anyone that I've seen in such a long time. For that article that that I'm working on, that you're mentioning, that I've worked on, that you're mentioning I looked back at what all the scouts and draft experts had to say about him, and uniformly they mentioned the things that we notice about him now as a Giant, the lunging, leaning, balance issues, and things like that. The fact that his when he goes forward with his arms, his feet don't come with him, and that's how he gets off balance, and so on and so forth. Everybody mentioned those things about him, yet everybody basically said these things can be corrected, and his positives are just so much higher than any of these negatives, that this guy looks like he's going to be a real beast in the NFL. And everyone had him as one of their top few players, either their top offensive tackle in that draft or the second one behind Ekwonu. And what we've seen, of course, for 2 years now is that, yeah, those issues that they all raised are there, and no, apparently they haven't been easy to fix. And I don't know whether that is draft experts who aren't coaches themselves underestimating how difficult it is to fix a flaw in someone's approach to things. How much of it is the quality of the coaching that he's getting on the Giants? And you've got to wonder about that, considering that the whole Giants offensive line was historically bad early in the season. But whatever it is, it's just the most puzzling and disappointing thing.
It is. And I talked to Dane Brugler of The Athletic, one of the best draft analysts in the business, had him on the show on Friday. And Dane and I talked about Neal. And Dane was one of those people who thought Neal was a slam dunk top 10 pick, is surprised at the lack of development. He's had some injuries. He had injuries last year. He's been in and out of the lineup this year. Concussion that cost him time in training camp, 2 ankle injuries this year. It's difficult to develop. It's difficult to continue to get better when you can't get on the practice field every day, when you're missing game reps. And those things have cost Neal this year. I thought there were a couple of glimpses, a couple of games where you thought, okay, he's showing some things, but when you can't get on the field, it's hard to build off that stuff. And, Dane mentioned to me, he said this was a guy who was on Bruce Feldman's college football freaks list before the draft, which talks about the best athletes in college football. And I think the thing that we've all been surprised about, that everyone's been surprised about, is, like you said, Tony, the fact that some of these issues haven't gone away or haven't improved. And for me, I've said it before, it's a lot of it is footwork, and a lot of it is just, they talk about some athletes as dancing bears, some of these offensive linemen. And I think we thought Evan Neal was going to be one of those guys, but he's not. He's a little bit clunky in his movements, in his footwork. And that's not to say he still can't be a right tackle, but the Giants have to know. They have to get him out there. And if they're still not sure at the end of this season, then you think they have to go into free agency and look for a right tackle, or they have to go into the draft and look for a right tackle and move Neal into guard. So I'm hopeful that Neal gets on the field, so they've got, whether he succeeds or fails, so that they've got as much information, as much evidence as possible to make their decision with.
Yeah, and there's such a big difference between going into a season thinking that you've got at least 3 of your 5 pieces on the offensive line settled, taking Andrew Thomas as one of the other ones, of course, and John Michael Schmitz, who obviously is a rookie and he's had some growing pains, but overall he's looked fairly solid there at center. And so I think there's every reason to think that at the least he'll develop into a capable center. And so in my mind, I feel like they've got 2 of the 5 positions settled. And if that third one, and especially since it's a tackle, could be settled, and you just get into the offseason saying, well, are there ways for us to strengthen the guard position? Or hope for development from the existing young guards that they have. That's a lot better position to be in than if you think you've still got 3/5 of the line that you have to do work on in the offseason. And especially because in round 1, when you'd ordinarily want to take an offensive tackle, I think most of us know the Giants might want to use their first round pick on a different position than tackle.
Absolutely. And I don't want to really stray into that whole quarterback discussion at this point, but you're right. You don't want to have to use that pick because you made that pick already, and that means that you're circling back to something you already thought that you fixed not that long ago, and that just lengthens the build. It lengthens getting to where you want to be. And you mentioned 3/5 of the offensive line, and Dan Hatman of the Scouting Academy, who's a friend and who I have on the show every so often, always says that what you need on an offensive line, you need 3 studs. You need 3 studs, and then you work with the other 2 positions. You try to find adequate players. You try to fill in those spots the best you can. And if you can find adequate players for those 2 spots, with 3 stud players around them, then you've really got something on the offensive line. And I think that's where the Giants hoped they would be with Evan Neal and John Michael Schmitz. And they don't want to circle back and have to start again there. But Tony, let's talk about, let's move off Neal, and let's talk about just quickly a couple of other players that you're really interested in over the last 5 games. I know for me, I'm really, really interested in the development of Jalen Hyatt over the last 5 games. He came off that Rookie of the Week performance, week 12, first 100-yard game of his career. We've seen a couple of flashes from him this year. I would love to see Hyatt begin to become, more consistently that sort of downfield game-changing kind of player that the Giants are able to get the ball 2, 3, 4, 5 times a game. So I'm really interested in him. I'm interested in Azeez Ojulari to see if he can show something. I don't know how healthy Ojulari actually is because he's done nothing even when he's been on the field. But, there are a few guys that I'm really interested in. I'm curious which guys, we've talked about DeVito. We've talked about Neal. I'm curious if there are a couple guys that you personally are really interested in seeing over the last 5 games?
Well, I certainly won't disagree with you about Hyatt. I did not put him on my list, um, only because my approach to my piece was to talk about players that I thought there were real question marks about.
Guys that
I
had to
don't
make decisions about, sure.
Guys you got to make decisions about. Yeah. So I don't put Hyatt in that category yet. I think the only question mark is just how good can he be? And I'd say that I am really stoked about Jalen Hyatt's future as a Giant. I think he's got a great chance to show what he can do regardless of whether DeVito or Taylor quarterbacks for the last 5 games, because both quarterbacks showed that they're perfectly willing to throw the ball downfield to him. And so I think he's got some real opportunities to show his development. I think what I would like to see from him is developing a more extensive route tree, so that they're not just using him when they take a shot downfield. He's been sort of, for the most part, an all or nothing kind of wide receiver, and that's great. The other thing I would like to see from him, and this is not actually his fault. This is the quarterback issue. But just once, I want to see a quarterback hit him in stride, because you saw over and over again when he was at Tennessee, if he gets the ball in space and you hit him in stride, he's going. He's going all the way. And unfortunately, the balls that have been thrown to him this year, he's had to make really good catches on, because they haven't really been perfectly thrown balls for the most part. And so he hasn't really had an opportunity to show off all of his talents. But beyond that, the other thing I would want to see from him is a more complex route tree, to see what he can do more on crossers and over routes and things of that sort, where you get him at that intermediate depths but in space, and then to see what he can make out of those in yards after catch, because I think he's got just tremendous potential. And go ahead.
No, I was going to say, beyond Hyatt, who else are you, just give me a couple of guys that are on your list as far as, guys the Giants have to make decisions on.
So you mentioned Azeez Ojulari, and he's on my list, and it's mainly because of all the injuries. It's partly because of all of the injuries. He's another guy that I looked back on to see what the scouting reports were on him when he was coming out of college, and many people had him. Actually, most people had him as a first-round talent, and there was at least one person that had him. I don't remember who had him. Oh, it was Dane Brugler. Yeah, in The Athletic, in The Beast, had Ojulari as his edge one coming out of that draft, and that was a fairly deep draft for edge rushers. There were a lot of them that went in the first round. Something like half a dozen went in the first round. Jalen Phillips and Owe and Tryon and I can't remember who else, called Kwity Paye, and so on and so forth. I'm leaving a few out, I know. Rousseau, that's the other one. And Brugler thought that Ojulari was better than all of them, and what they all talk about is his tremendous athleticism, and they thought that would play really well in the NFL. The one misgiving that they had about him was that they said he was small for an edge defender. He was like 15 to 20 pounds lighter than most of the other guys that were touted as round one picks. And they thought that he was a little bit of a one-trick pony with his speed moves and needed to develop other ways of getting to the quarterback, and that his small frame might make it difficult for him to do that. And maybe we've seen a little bit of that so far. He got off to a great start as a rookie with 10 sacks in limited action as a rookie. But then since then, he's not been as effective. And of course, he's had all these injuries. The ironic thing is the injuries have had nothing to do, supposedly, with the thing that happened to him in high school, which is what created the red flags on him just before the draft that caused him to slip to the second round in the first place, where Dave Gettleman could grab him. I think he's a good guy. He worked in the offseason a year ago to try to bulk up his upper body, probably so that he could do more of those strength type bullying type edge moves and so on. but we haven't seen it appear in his game. And when I look at him now, I just wonder whether he really is fully recovered from this year's injuries. I guess the most recent of which was a hamstring, if I remember correctly. I
Right.
still love him as a player. He's not particularly great against the run, but as a pass rusher, he's looked like he had so much promise. Obviously, he's got another year to show what he can do. But at this point, I think the Giants are going to have to find an edge defender either in the draft or in free agency somewhere, because they can't rely on him being edge 2 going into the next season. So if he can do something in these next 5 games to show that the old Ojulari is back, that would, I think, go a long way towards mollifying Giants fans and
You
coaches.
know, Ojulari had 5.5 sacks last year in just 7 games. He did show, some pass rush skill. He did show some of that explosion. He just didn't stay on the field enough.
Yeah.
And, this is a guy, as you said, he was a little bit light. He gained 10 to 15 pounds of muscle. And when you look at him, you just wonder, because he's had all manner of lower leg injuries, ankle injuries, hamstring, quad, all kinds of those kinds of injuries. You just wonder sometimes, some people, you gain that upper body weight, maybe your legs just can't support it. And maybe that's been part of the case for him with all of the lower leg injuries. He's a tremendously talented player. I said at the beginning of the season, now Kayvon Thibodeau's had a fantastic year, and he's developed and he's gotten better and better as a pass rusher. But I thought at the beginning of the year, and I said as much, that I thought Azeez Ojulari was a more natural pass rusher than Thibodeau. It's just, it hasn't shown up. It hasn't been there. Maybe it's because he hasn't been healthy, but I would like to see something from Ojulari over the last 5 games, because those two together, if they both play at the level that they're capable of, that the Giants expected them to play at, if they're both able to do that, then that's really special for a defense with guys coming off the opposite edges, wreaking that kind of havoc on opposing quarterbacks.
Yeah, and I think you can't underestimate how having a good edge defender on the other side helps your number one edge defender on the opposite side, because the way the Giants are right now, teams don't have to plan for the other side of the line. They can just do whatever they need to do to try to disrupt Thibodeau. They can chip him with a tight end, or or do anything that they want to do to keep him from getting into the backfield, because they know that on most plays the other side of the line can probably be handled just by the tackle who's out there. I think back to the beginning of the 2022 season, and I was starting to get really excited about the Giants edge defender room, because you had just drafted Thibodeau. You had Ojulari coming into his second season after a good first season. They had Zimenez, who had shown a little bit of promise early in his career. They had just drafted Ellerson Smith, who was a developmental project but looked like a really talented guy. And then they had I thought, stolen Quincy Roche from the Pittsburgh practice squad, and he played well in a few games in 2021. He won the game against Las Vegas by strip sacking Derek Carr at the end of the game, and I said, "Wow, they're really developing a nice edge room on this team." And now you fast forward to now, and of course Zimenez was just released from the practice squad. Ellerson Smith could never stay healthy, and he's gone. Quincy Roche was released. And Ojulari is another guy who can't stay on the field. And so you basically got Thibodeau and I was going to say no one else, although it's probably a bad week to say no one else after Jihad Ward got 2 sacks, I believe, against New England. And Benton Whitley, who was only in for a few snaps, actually blocked a pass from Bailey Zappi toward the end of the game that might have been that was a drive killing play. So he actually did some good things. But the Giants really are so shallow at this position that having Ojulari return to full strength and be anywhere near as effective as he was in his first year, would mean, I think, so much to that defense.
Absolutely. You got one more?
And so the one more who I think is one of the most interesting cases is Xavier McKinney. And I've never been so, I think, puzzled or frustrated with a draft pick as I have been with McKinney. If you go back to draft night in 2020, as they were getting toward the end of the first round, of course, the Giants had taken Andrew Thomas, and we knew that they had a high second round pick. And as they were getting toward the end of the first round, and on TV, they're always looking at players that are still on the board, right, as each team comes up. And Mel Kiper was going crazy, repeating almost every 5 minutes. And Xavier McKinney is still sitting there. He's a definite round one value. And when he didn't go in the first round, he was surprised. And then when the Giants came up early in the second round and grabbed him, I was just absolutely thrilled. I said, oh, this is going to be a great draft. You got your left tackle, you got your free safety. And that was a deep year for safeties. There were about 5 of them, I think, that went in that second round. And really the only question is whether McKinney or Antoine Winfield Jr. would be the best of them. And in 2020, naturally, you didn't get to see him much because he got hurt in training camp, but he did in 2020 come back at the end of the season and intercept a pass in the end zone to save a win against Dallas in the final game of the season. And then in 2021, he started to look like the guy. He had, I think, 5 interceptions that season, and looked like he was kind of taking over there as the quarterback of that defense. And I was really excited when Wink came in. I said, oh, Wink is going to use this guy in all kinds of different ways, and it's going to be tremendous. He's going to tap into his full potential. And last year he was about as mediocre as you could get, and then he went in and had his ATV ride and missed the second half of the season. Didn't come back till the playoffs. And good thing he did, because he was the guy who tackled T.J. Hawkinson on the crucial play of the Minnesota playoff game on 4th and 8 and held him to a 3-yard gain. So he did contribute something important. But this year it was more the same. And he looked like nothing. Now, all of a sudden, after his outburst in Las Vegas, the last 2 weeks, for whatever reason, he's playing really, really well. And he finally had an interception this year, and it was a beautiful interception where he had to really come down from center field to get it. And he's just played really well. And I just say to myself, wow, I'd love to have this guy back on a second contract if they could afford it. And that's another big question for him. Can they afford him? Because he'll be looking for something big, and it's going to cost them. I don't want to say $20 million, but it's going to cost them more than 15 to probably get him to sign something that he and his agent will agree to. And you know what? If he can play the rest of the season the way he did these last 2 games, then I'd find a way to make that work. If not, then it's just another case of a lost draft pick, I think.
Yeah, and I hope it doesn't turn out that way. He's had 4 straight weeks now of double-digit tackles. And if you look at the Pro Football Focus grades, which are never the be-all and end-all, but they are an indication of a player who's playing well. He's had grades of 71, 83, and 91 the last 3 weeks. So he is playing really well. I've always looked at the way that Wink Martindale has used him, because I think McKinney is a better center field safety, a better zone safety than he is a guy who plays man-to-man defense. I think he's better in that role where he can face the quarterback and play center field and make some decisions that way. And I thought it was worth pointing out that he was in center field when he made that interception the other day. He was in a situation where he read the play and basically beat the throw to the spot and made the interception. And that was reminiscent of what he did 2 seasons ago. And, maybe that is also maybe using him in center field more, and I'd have to look at the stats. Maybe that's an adjustment that Wink Martindale has begun to make. Just changing up how the Giants cover in the back end. And I find it a positive if McKinney gets to play facing the quarterback a little bit more.
Yeah, I agree with that. I've actually looked into a couple of those things that you just mentioned. One of the other things that PFF does give you that's not subjective is they give you stats for defensive backs on where exactly or how many plays they play at each position, free safety, in the box, in the slot, and so on and so forth. And I was thinking that yeah, maybe the change over the last 2 weeks is that he's playing free safety more than he was playing early in the season. But that turns out not to have really been the case, although he did play a decent bit of free safety against New England. And as you say, he was at the free safety position when he made that interception. The other thing I tried to look at is the types of coverages that Wink is using, how often he was using man versus zone and what kind of zone. And I found stats on that for games 1 through 11. I didn't see it for game 12 yet. But the one thing about the Washington game, game 11, was that Wink played very little man defense in that game for the first time all season. And he played a ton of cover three. And of course, if you're going to play cover three, then probably McKinney's going to be the guy back there as the middle of the field safety in cover three. And as you say, the play that he made the interception on last week, it was a cover three situation too, where the two cornerbacks on either side were playing zone coverage. McKinney was in center field and went over and toward Deontay Banks's man, I think it was, and cut over to make that interception. So we don't know what it is that he wanted Wink to do different that Wink wasn't doing, but whatever it is, they should keep on doing it because
there is something different. And the last thing I'll say about McKinney is, look, the Giants are 4-8. They need, I say this over and over, they need difference makers. They need game changers. They need guys, who change the outcome of football games. And if Xavier McKinney can be one of those players, and he can be if he plays the way he did the last 2 weeks, if he can be one of those players and he shows that to you often enough, then if you're the Giants, you have to find a way to make it work. You have to find a way. He's still a homegrown guy, even if it wasn't, Joe Shane and Brian Daboll who drafted him. He's still a homegrown player. But if he can be a difference maker, you have to find a way to keep him in a Giants uniform.
Yeah, I agree, and I guess if you think about the philosophy of managing your salary cap, then I think you just kind of outlined how you do it. There are a small number of players that you have to give big contracts to, and those are the players that you deem to be difference makers for your team. And so if you get 2021 Xavier McKinney, if you get the last two games Xavier McKinney, then I could see paying that guy a big salary because that can really do so much for your backfield, especially if he can keep on intercepting passes, because we know that turnovers have been such a bugaboo for the Giants. Not that they've turned the ball over so much themselves. It's just that they haven't generated many turnovers the last couple of years. And so if he can get back to that 2021 form, that I think can mean so much to the defense, because the defense, frankly, is starting to have a few of those real difference-making players. I mean, obviously, Dexter Lawrence has become the ultimate game-changing player on defense. I can't believe how good a player he's become, and I also can't believe how good a player Bobby Okereke has been in a Giants uniform. I think he's playing lights out this season, and I ordinarily don't think of linebacker, inside linebacker, off-ball linebacker, as a difference-making position, but he's making it a difference-making position. So you have another one of those guys in the defensive backfield, then you potentially have a real shutdown defense.
I also think his Pro Football Focus grades don't show it, and the results of a couple of the games don't show it. But I believe very strongly in Deontay Banks. I think Deontay Banks, he's not that player today, but I think he will eventually be that difference making, maybe shut down, maybe not shut down, but very good difference-making type player at a cornerback position as well. Tony, last thing, really, 5 games left, 3 winnable, what I would call winnable games: Green Bay, New Orleans, Los Angeles Rams on the schedule. We'll forget that. We'll forget those 2 games against that other team that wears green helmets, that other team with one of those Kelsey guys. But
although you never know, by game 17 they may have clinched the division and only play their scrubs the way they did last year, and the Giants almost snuck a win out of that one.
Hey, you never know. We'll take wins whatever way we can get them. But just curious, as an overall thought, I mean, do you care how many games the Giants win the rest of the way? Just, as a team, as a product on the field, what is it that kind of piques your curiosity for the last 5 weeks?
So, of course, I want the Giants to get the highest draft pick possible. Okay, and while it looks right now as if they probably are out of the running for picks 1 and 2, they're still, I think, in the running for anywhere from 3 to 4, 5, or 6, or something like that. And if they actually go on a run, they might even knock themselves out of the top 10. So obviously, I want to see the Giants get as high a pick as possible. But you find out, I think, what kind of a fan what type of fan you really are by how you emotionally react during the course of a game. And so over these last 2 weeks, I've gotten excited when the Giants play well. I want them to, and that tells me I want them to win. I want the high draft pick, but I want them to win more. And it's hard for me to envision myself rooting against them to lose any game. So I want to see them play well. I think these last few games are interesting, just because now the league will start to have gotten a little bit of film on DeVito. And so you'll see, have they decided on ways they think they can ruffle him and make him less effective than he has been? Not so much next Monday night against Green Bay, but the following week against New Orleans, he's going to see a really good defense. And I'll be interested to see whether he can actually kind of do some damage against a defense like that. And so, these are kind of the things that I'm looking for. I want to see whether the offensive line really is starting to solidify. It's played better in the last 4 or 5 weeks. I'd like to see that continue so that it's not considered to be so much of a disaster going into next season. And I want to see Brian Daboll and the staff weather the turbulence and come out the other side into calmer waters, not having had things blow up the way they did under Joe Judge in 2021. I didn't.
Tony, you mean you don't want to see who would win a brawl between Daboll and Wink Martindale on the sideline? You don't want to see that on national TV?
well, that would be fun, but frankly, I'll be disappointed if Wink goes, because I love Wink as a defensive coach, and I love Daboll as a head coach, and I think he's done so many things well that I'd hate to see one of them go, and maybe it's inevitable that they part ways at the end of the season. But if I had my druthers, they'd both be back next year. And what you just don't want to see is the season blowing up the way it has so many times in 2017 and 2021. And so on. I'm an Ulster. I go back as far. I can go back to 1964 when things blew up from a team that had been to 3 straight championship games. So I've seen enough of that in my Giants lifetime. I'd like to see some continuity in coaching, and I like the guys they have there now, and I'd like to see them continue. Most of them anyway. If they want to replace Bobby Johnson, I'm fine with that.
I hear you, Tony. Thank you very, very much for the time. Giants fans, thank you as always for listening. Please remember to stay with Big Blue View for all of your Giants needs. Please stay safe out there. Take care of each other, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.